A young billionaire comes across two homeless twin sisters who point toward an old amusement park. Minutes later, while exploring the place, he can't hold back his tears upon discovering what they were so afraid of. The digital clock on the car's dashboard showed 5:42 p.m. when Thomas Carter finally left the underground parking garage of his office building. It had been a particularly demanding day, with 3 project presentations and a decisive meeting with investors interested in his latest proposal, a fully sustainable residential complex that promised to revolutionize the concept of eco-friendly housing in the city. Thomas adjusted the rearview mirror, observing his own reflection for a moment. At 32, his youthful face contrasted with the seriousness in his eyes. His impeccably tailored navy blue suit and perfectly aligned tie were symbols of the success he had achieved, but he never let them define him. His hands, though now carrying an elegant leather briefcase, still bore small scars from the times he helped his mother clean houses on weekends. That thought took him back to Alice, his mother, and a soft smile appeared on his lips. That very morning, she had called to share news about her new community gardening projects. Even after retiring, Alice couldn't stay still. "Busy hands keep the heart light," she always said. Thomas knew that part of his own work ethic came from that tireless woman who, for years, balanced 3 different jobs to ensure he could study. The traffic was especially heavy that autumn afternoon. Golden leaves danced along the sidewalks, carried by a cool breeze that announced the approaching evening. Thomas watched the movement through the windshield absent-mindedly. Hurried executives with phones glued to their ears, students lugging heavy backpacks, street vendors arranging their products to make the most of rush hour. That was when something unusual caught his attention. In the middle of the bustling sidewalk, like 2 small statues in a sea of motion, stood 2 girls. Identical down to the last detail, they couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Their blue dresses, although visibly worn, were clean and carefully ironed. Their brown hair, each in matching ponytails tied with blue ribbons, gently swayed in the breeze. But it wasn't their appearance that made Thomas slow down the car, ignoring the impatient honking behind him. It was the expression on their faces. The 2 girls were pointing intently at something in the distance, their small arms raised in perfect sync. Their large, dark eyes held a disquieting intensity, fixed on a single point on the horizon. Thomas followed the direction of their gaze. Between the modern buildings and bright billboards, an old structure stood out against a sky that was beginning to turn orange, the deteriorating silhouette of a Ferris wheel, part of a long-abandoned amusement park. The light turned red, giving Thomas a few moments to observe the scene more closely. The girls did not move, did not blink, did not react to the constant flow of people passing by. Some pedestrians threw curious glances their way, while others were completely oblivious to their presence. Their small fingers were tightly intertwined, as if each one feared losing the other's hand. Memories of his own childhood began to surface in Thomas's mind. He recalled the countless times he waited alone by the school door, long after classes ended, because his mother was stuck at one of her 3 jobs. He remembered the feeling of vulnerability, that silent fear of being forgotten. Even though he knew his mother would always come for him, she always did. The light turned green, and the honking behind him intensified. Thomas glanced one more time at the girls through the rearview mirror. Something in their blank stares, in the way they clung to each other, stirred a restlessness in him that he couldn't ignore. Signaling, he maneuvered the car to the side of the road, ignoring the irritated looks from other drivers. He parked a few yards from the girls, his heart beating faster than usual. Years of business experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts screamed that something was wrong. Thomas turned off the car and spent a few moments watching the girls through the rearview mirror. The sun continued its descent, and shadows from the buildings began to stretch across the street, creating a play of light and shadow that made the scene even more surreal. Making up his mind, he grabbed his phone and quickly checked the emergency numbers he might need. Years of dealing with contracts and negotiations had taught him always to be prepared. He straightened his tie, a nervous habit he had never managed to break, and got out of the car. The noise of the city hit him full force. Distant honking, fragmented conversations, the squeaking of buses at stops, music escaping from a nearby shop. But the girls remained in absolute silence, as if they existed in a bubble separate from the reality around them. Approaching carefully, Thomas could see more details. The dresses, though worn, showed signs of care. Small patches sewn with attention, stains that had been carefully removed. Their shoes, a pair of white sneakers now somewhat yellowed, were clean, though the soles were noticeably worn out. "Hello?" Thomas said softly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Are you okay? Are you waiting for someone?" The twins turned their heads toward him with a movement so perfectly in sync, it gave Thomas a chill. Their eyes, a deep brown that looked almost black in the evening light, met his. There was something in that gaze, a mixture of fear and silent plea that made his heart tighten. The girls did not respond. Instead, they went back to pointing at the abandoned park, their arms trembling slightly with the effort of keeping them raised. A stronger gust of wind blew past them, causing the blue dresses to flutter and revealing bruised knees covered with colorful band-aids. Thomas crouched down, getting on their level. "My name is Thomas," he tried again, his voice gentle. "Can I help you find your parents?" The mention of parents caused a visible reaction. The twin on the right, the one Thomas noticed had a small star-shaped patch on the pocket of her dress, tightened her grip on her sister's hand. Tears began to form in both girls' eyes, but they remained silent, their arms still insistently pointing toward the park. The sun was now lower on the horizon, and the city lights were starting to come on. The air had grown considerably colder, and Thomas noticed that the girls were shivering slightly in their thin dresses. Without thinking twice, he took off his jacket and offered it to them. To his surprise, they accepted the gesture, though without words. The twin on the left took the jacket with her free hand and, in a practiced motion, covered herself and her sister without ever letting go of each other's hands. Thomas glanced at the busy street. People continued to pass by, some slowing down to look at the unusual sight, a businessman crouching before two little twins, but no one stopped to help. It was as if the entire city was trapped in its own bubble of indifference. In the distance, the abandoned Ferris wheel stood against the darkening sky, its rusted framework like twisted fingers pointing toward the first stars that began to appear. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. "Do you want to show me something over there?" Thomas asked, pointing to the park. For the first time, a flicker of something different passed through the girls' eyes, a mix of relief and fear. They nodded in unison, silent tears now streaming down their pale cheeks. Thomas found himself at a crossroads. The rational part of his brain, the same that had made him a successful businessman, told him to call the police immediately, but there was something deeper. Perhaps the part of him that still remembered what it felt like to be a vulnerable child, that stopped him from simply handing over the situation to the authorities. A distant rumble of thunder echoed through the city, as if underlining the gravity of the moment. Streetlights began switching on automatically, bathing the sidewalk in a yellowish glow that created long, distorted shadows. Thomas looked at the girls again. Under his oversized jacket, they looked even smaller and more fragile. Their eyes, though filled with tears, held on to that almost supernatural determination, still fixed on the distant park. The wind rose again, bringing with it a few drops of rain. People on the street began to hurry their steps, seeking shelter. But the twins remained still, as if nothing else mattered except for what they needed to show him. Thomas knew he was about to make a decision that could change many lives, including his own. Years of business had taught him that sometimes the greatest risks bring the greatest rewards. But this was different. It wasn't about contracts or projects. It was about two children clearly needing help, even if they couldn't or wouldn't put it into words. The rain began to fall harder now, creating circular patterns in the puddles forming on the asphalt. The city lights reflected off the water, creating an urban kaleidoscope of colors and movement. But amid that growing chaos, three figures remained still on the sidewalk. A man in his shirt sleeves and two tiny girls sharing an oversized jacket, brought together by a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. Thomas glanced one last time at his parked car, at his phone with emergency numbers still displayed. at the busy street where normal life continued uninterrupted. Then he turned his eyes back to the girls and made his choice. "All right," he said softly, standing up. "Let's go see what you want to show me." The twins looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd seen them, identical little smiles appeared on their faces. It was as if, after hours or maybe days of waiting, they had finally found someone who could help. The rain continued to fall, but none of the three seemed to mind. In the distance, the abandoned Ferris wheel stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its rusted framework guarding secrets that the two little twins seemed determined to reveal. Thomas didn't know what he would find in that abandoned park, but something in his heart told him his life would never be the same after this night. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, my son, the greatest acts of love begin with a single act of courage." And so, under the steadily falling rain, three figures started their journey toward the abandoned amusement park. A man who had learned to trust his instincts, and two little girls who, in their silence, carried a story desperately waiting to be told. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle by the time they reached the rusty gates of the amusement park. Large metal letters, some missing, still spelled out "Magic Paradise" on a deteriorated archway above the entrance. The irony of the name did not escape Thomas, who watched the abandoned structures casting grotesque shadows under the fading evening light. The twins were still huddled under his jacket, but their steps had become more hesitant as they approached. Thomas noticed how their small bodies grew more tense with every yard closer they got, like birds about to take flight at the first sign of danger. The main gate was held shut by rusted chains, but the girls guided him to a side opening in the fence, well hidden behind overgrown bushes. The path looked well trodden, with trampled vegetation forming a narrow trail. Entering the park, Thomas felt as though they were crossing into another world. The contrast with the busy city they had left behind couldn't have been sharper. Here, silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of rusted metal swaying in the wind and the distant cooing of pigeons sheltered in the taller structures. The Ferris wheel they had seen from the street looked even more impressive up close. Its empty cabins swayed gently in the breeze, some still bearing traces of their original colors under layers of rust and neglect. A nearby carousel stood frozen in a perpetual race, the once merry horses now appearing almost grotesque under the dim light. Thomas took it all in with the trained eye of an architect, noting how nature was slowly reclaiming the space. Vines climbed broken lampposts, small trees sprouted through cracks in the concrete, and moss covered much of the metal surfaces. At another time, he might have found the view fascinating from a professional perspective, but not today. Not with two frightened girls leading him through this maze of abandoned memories. The twins led him along a winding path between the rides. They passed a funhouse hall of mirrors with most of the glass broken, the shards glittering like dirty diamonds on the floor. A roller coaster loomed in the distance, its tracks carving impossible loops against the darkening sky like a slumbering metal serpent. It was when they reached a more secluded area of the park that Thomas began to notice the first signs of recent habitation. An old shooting gallery booth, its faded awning still partly intact, showed clear signs of having been converted into an improvised shelter. Thomas stopped, his heart tightening in his chest. "Is this where you live?" The twins nodded, still in their characteristic silence. Thomas approached the booth, noticing details that told a painful story. Old blankets carefully folded in a corner, some clothes hanging from improvised lines, empty food wrappers neatly stacked. There were also more disturbing signs, several empty liquor bottles scattered on the ground, some broken, and marks on the wooden walls that looked like they had been made by fists or objects thrown in anger. Amid those signs of chaos, Thomas noticed little touches that could only have come from the girls. A makeshift vase with wild flowers already wilting, childish drawings taped to the wall with worn-out tape, a tattered rag doll carefully placed on a wooden crate. Suddenly, a harsh voice shattered the silence like thunder. "You two in here. Where's my money?" The effect on the girls was instantaneous and devastating. Their small bodies began to shake violently, and they moved closer to Thomas as if he were a shield. For the first time since he'd found them, one of the girls made a sound, a small whimper of fear that broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. The sound of unsteady footsteps echoed among the abandoned structures, drawing nearer. Thomas could hear the clinking of empty bottles being kicked, accompanied by mumbling curses. "Where did you run off to, you worthless brats?" The voice was closer now, seething with drunken anger. "I told you not to come back without any money." Thomas felt the girls press even closer behind him. Instinctively, he positioned himself between them and the source of the noise, his body as tense as a coiled spring. Years of tough negotiations had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, but this was different. This was visceral. Then Robert appeared, staggering between two old booths. He was of medium height, but his bloodshot eyes and aggressive posture made him seem larger. His clothes were dirty and rumpled, and he was holding a half-empty bottle in one hand. For a moment, he looked confused at the sight of Thomas there. Then his eyes landed on the girls partially hidden behind the architect, and his expression morphed into a mask of fury. "Who are you?" he growled, stepping forward unsteadily. "And what are you doing with my girls?" Before Thomas could respond, Robert switched his focus, shouting at the twins. "You, I told you to get money. Where is it?" In a move too quick for Thomas to prevent, Robert grabbed the arm of one of the girls, the one on the right, with the star-shaped patch, yanking her violently. "Answer me when I talk to you." What happened next was forever seared into Thomas's memory. Tears began to roll down his face as he watched the scene unfold. The tiny girl being shaken like a rag doll, her sister clinging to her free hand, refusing to let go even at the risk of being hit as well. "You're as useless as your mother," Robert continued, his face red with rage. "You're good for nothing. She died and left me with you, and you can't even bring in money." Something inside Thomas snapped. All the memories of his own childhood, the sacrifices his mother had made, the unconditional love she'd shown even in the hardest moments, collided violently with the cruelty he was witnessing. "Let her go. Now," his voice came out low but charged with an authority that surprised even him. Tears still streamed down his cheeks, but his eyes were resolute, locked on Robert. "Who do you think you are to order me around?" Robert advanced, still holding the girl. "These brats are my responsibility. You can let her go right now," Thomas interrupted, his voice stronger, "or I can call the police and explain why 2 5-year-olds are being forced to beg while living in an abandoned park." Thomas pulled out his phone, keeping his eyes on Robert. The man paused, his booze-clouded eyes flicking from the phone to Thomas's determined face. "This is none of your business," Robert tried again, but a hint of his former aggression was already gone. "They're my legal responsibility." "Legal?" Thomas stepped closer, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "There's nothing legal about making 2 children live like this, forcing them to beg, hurting them." While speaking, Thomas discreetly dialed the emergency number on his phone, keeping the device partially hidden. The rain had started again, heavier this time, and distant thunder seemed to underscore each of his words. "You have exactly 3 seconds to let go of her arm," Thomas continued, his voice now dangerously calm. "After that, not only will the police be on their way, but also social services, child protection, and every other authority I can get in touch with." Something in Thomas's tone must have cut through Robert's alcoholic haze, because he released the girl's arm. She immediately ran behind Thomas, joining her sister. "They've got no one else," Robert mumbled, his earlier rage turning into a sort of drunken self-pity. "Their mother died. I'm all they've got." "No," Thomas answered firmly, feeling the twins' small hands gripping his pant legs. "You're not all they have. Not anymore." In one smooth motion, Thomas scooped up each of the girls in one arm. They were surprisingly light, as if living here had begun to erase their physical presence. Their small bodies trembled, but for the first time since he found them, Thomas felt them relax just a little in his arms. "If you try to follow us," Thomas said over his shoulder as he walked away, "or if you try to stop us in any way, I will make all those calls I just mentioned." "Understood." Robert did not reply. He just stood there, a pathetic figure swaying in the rain, surrounded by empty bottles and broken dreams, much like the abandoned structures around him. Thomas made his way back through the park toward the exit, the girls safely in his arms. The rain was still coming down, but none of them seemed to care. The city lights appeared brighter now, like a beacon guiding them back to civilization. "You'll never have to come back here," Thomas whispered to the girls as he walked. "I promise." And for the first time since he found them, the twins responded, not with words, but by hugging him tighter, their small faces buried in his neck, silent tears mixing with the falling rain. Behind them, the abandoned park remained like a scar on the urban landscape, its rusted structures bearing silent witness to so many stories of pain. But for two little girls in the arms of a stranger who had decided to care, that night marked not an end, but a beginning. Thomas didn't know exactly what he would do next, but he was sure of one thing. Just as his mother had done everything possible to secure his future, he would do the same for these two children fate had placed in his path. As he drove through the rainy city, the twins fast asleep in the back seat wrapped in his jacket, Thomas couldn't help but let his mind wander to the past. The rearview mirror showed two small figures huddled together, seeking comfort in sleep, the way only children can, even after traumatic moments. The scene stirred deep memories of his own childhood. He vividly remembered the small kitchen of the apartment where he grew up, with its yellowish walls and a formica table always covered with his homework, which he did while waiting for his mother to come home from work. Alice would arrive late, her hands rough from her cleaning jobs, but her eyes would always light up at the sight of her son's notebooks laid out on the table. "My little architect," she used to say, observing the sketches he made in the margins, drawings of imaginary buildings and fantastic cities. Even if exhausted after a full day's work, she always found the energy to sit by his side and listen to his animated explanations about every detail he had drawn. One memory in particular surfaced with full force. He was 12 years old and had just won a school drawing contest. The prize was a set of professional colored pencils, something they could never have afforded. That night, Alice came home carrying a small chocolate cake she'd bought with what little money she had managed to save. "It doesn't matter where you came from, but where you want to go," she said as she cut the cake, her simple words carrying the weight of a fundamental truth that would shape Thomas's entire life. "And you, my son, will go far." A jolt in the road brought Thomas momentarily back to the present. He checked the twins in the rearview mirror. They were still sound asleep. He returned to his memories. His high school years had been particularly challenging. Alice was now working 3 different jobs, cleaning during the day, sewing in her spare afternoons, and on some nights, waiting tables at a local diner. Thomas spent many evenings alone, but he never truly felt abandoned. Each of his mother's absences was a testament of love, a sacrifice made so he could keep studying. It was during that time that Thomas began to truly understand the meaning of determination. He watched his mother wake up before sunrise, return home long after dark, and still maintain a smile on her face and words of encouragement on her lips. "Education is the one thing no one can take away from you," she always said, her calloused hands stroking his hair. Late nights of studying stretched on, lit by a small lamp Alice had found in one of the houses where she worked. Its owner was going to throw it away, but allowed her to bring it home. Thomas studied with a fierce determination, knowing that every good grade, every academic achievement, was his way of honoring his mother's sacrifices. He still got choked up remembering the day his university acceptance letter arrived. A full scholarship for architecture. Alice cried as she read the letter, her tears staining the official paper. "I always knew," she said through joyful sobs. "I always knew you could do it." A distant rumble of thunder brought Thomas back to the present. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and city lights danced on the wet pavement. In the back seat, one of the twins shifted slightly in her sleep, and her sister instinctively held her closer. Thomas's mind drifted to his college years. They were tough times, even with a full scholarship. There were still expenses for materials, transportation, food. Alice kept working 3 jobs, refusing to let her son take on anything that might interfere with his studies. "Your job is to study," she insisted. "My job is to make sure you can." On weekends, when he came home, Thomas often found his mother asleep at the sewing machine, bits of fabric still in her hands. She took in extra tailoring projects to help cover costs and would often spend entire nights working. Every project at college, every top grade, every compliment from professors was dedicated to her. Thomas studied with an intensity that impressed even the most dedicated classmates. "You're lucky to have so much talent," they would say. But Thomas knew it wasn't luck. It was the result of the determination he had learned from his mother. Graduation was a triumph for both of them. Alice sat in the front row in a dress she had sewn herself for the occasion. Her eyes shone with tears of pride as Thomas received his diploma, announced as the top student in his class. Thomas glanced again at the back seat through the rearview mirror. The twins slept peacefully, their small hands still intertwined, even in slumber. His heart tightened at the thought of everything they had already been through: the loss of their mother, the cruelty of their stepfather, life in the abandoned park. He remembered the first years after graduation, when he began his career. Alice finally allowed herself to cut back on work, sticking to just one cleaning job during the day. Even so, she still did small sewing projects for fun, though Thomas knew it was her way of keeping an emergency fund. His first major architecture project was a sustainable residential complex. On the day of its unveiling, Alice was there, proud yet discreet, watching her son present the project to investors and community officials. Later, when they were alone, she held his hands and said with tears in her eyes, "You've come so far, my son, but most importantly, you've never forgotten where you came from." And she was right. Every professional accomplishment, every new successful project, every step in his ascending career was tempered by the memory of his humble roots and the sacrifices that had made it all possible. Now, driving through the city with two little orphans in the back seat, Thomas understood more than ever the transformational power of love and unconditional support. His mother had been his guiding light, his anchor, his greatest supporter. As he looked again at the twins through the mirror, Thomas felt a certainty growing in his heart. He would be for them what his mother had been for him. It doesn't matter where you came from, but where you want to go. Alice's words echoed in his mind as he made the decision that would change not only his life, but theirs forever. Picking up his phone, Thomas dialed a number he knew by heart. After 2 rings, a familiar, comforting voice answered. "Son, is something wrong?" "Mom," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I need your help, and I need you to make that special hot chocolate of yours. I'm bringing 2 very special people for you to meet." In the back seat, the twins kept sleeping, unaware of the conversation that would shape their future. The rain had fully stopped now, and the first stars were starting to appear in the night sky like tiny beacons of hope, guiding the way to a new beginning. The shopping center was still open when Thomas parked his car. The place's bright lights were a stark contrast to the dark, rainy night they had left behind. In the back seat, the twins woke from their brief nap, blinking in confusion at the sudden brightness. "We're going to buy some things for you," Thomas said gently, watching them through the mirror. The girls glanced at each other, a silent conversation passing between them the way only twins can manage. The department store was relatively empty at that hour. A young sales assistant approached them the moment they entered, her professional smile wavering slightly when she noticed the state of the girls' clothing. Thomas was still in just his dress shirt, now wrinkled, having given his jacket to the twins. "We need complete outfits for both," he told the sales assistant, his voice low but firm. "And shoes. Everything in their sizes." The twins stayed close to each other, their small hands intertwined as always. Their eyes, however, roamed the children's section with an interest they couldn't entirely hide. Thomas noticed how they looked, especially at one rack of colorful dresses. "You can pick out whatever you like," he said kindly. "How about we start with the dresses?" Emma, the twin Thomas now identified as the one with the star-shaped patch on her old dress, was the first to step hesitantly toward the clothes. Her free hand lightly touched a pale pink dress with small embroidered flowers. "Do you like this one?" Thomas asked. Emma nodded shyly. "And you, Sarah? Is there one you like?" Sarah looked at her sister as if seeking permission, then pointed at a very similar dress in light blue. Thomas smiled, taking both dresses. "We'll need more than just one," he said. "How about we pick out several?" Over the next 40 minutes, Thomas and the sales assistant, who now better understood the situation and showed genuine kindness, helped the girls choose a complete wardrobe: dresses, pants, shirts, warm jackets for the upcoming autumn, socks, new underwear, soft pajamas with unicorn prints. In the shoe section, Thomas insisted they try several pairs until they found the most comfortable ones. When Sarah slipped on her new purple sandals, a tiny smile appeared on her face, the first Thomas had seen since he'd found them. It was in the toy section that they had their first surprise. Emma stopped suddenly in front of a shelf of art supplies, her eyes fixed on a set of professional colored pencils, very similar to the one Thomas had won in that contest during his childhood. "Do you like to draw?" he asked softly. Emma nodded. "Mummy always gave us paper to draw on while she sewed," she whispered, almost inaudibly. Thomas took the set of pencils, drawing pads, and other art materials. He noticed that Sarah was more interested in children's books, especially one with illustrations of gardens and flowers. He added several of those to the basket as well. After paying, Thomas completely disregarding the substantial bill, they headed to the family restroom. With bags of new clothes in hand, he waited patiently outside while the twins changed, assisted by the kind sales assistant who volunteered to help. When they emerged, it was as though two different girls had entered the restroom. Emma wore her new pink dress, Sarah wore her new blue one, both with matching new shoes and freshly brushed hair, using the combs they'd just gotten. Their old dresses were placed in a separate bag. Thomas noticed they hadn't wanted to throw them away, likely because their mother had made them. "You must be hungry," Thomas said, noticing that it was already past 8 o'clock. "I know a place nearby that serves delicious pasta. How does that sound?" The Italian restaurant was just a few minutes from the mall. It was a family-owned place, with red and white checkered tablecloths and a welcoming aroma of tomato sauce and fresh herbs in the air. The hostess led them to a cozy corner table, bringing 2 special booster seats for the girls. Thomas helped the twins settle in, noticing how their eyes roamed the place with curiosity. An elderly waiter approached with menus and 2 coloring sets with crayons for the girls, a small courtesy the establishment offered to young customers. "Do you like pasta?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer by the way they looked at the plates passing by on nearby tables. Both nodded. Thomas ordered spaghetti and meatballs for the 3 of them, grape juice for the girls, and water for himself. While they waited, the twins began quietly coloring their pages, still holding each other's hands under the table. The waiter brought a basket of fresh bread and butter first. Thomas noticed the girls looking at it hungrily, but they waited as if they needed permission. "Go ahead and take one," he said gently. "It's here for you to eat." They began eating slowly, politely, but it was evident they were starving. Thomas's heart ached, wondering how long it had been since they'd had a proper meal. When the main dishes arrived, the familiar smell of homemade spaghetti filled the air around the table. That's when it happened. Emma, staring intently at her plate, broke the silence she had maintained since the park. "Mommy used to make pasta like this," she whispered, her voice small but clear. Sarah, beside her, nodded in agreement, her eyes also fixed on the plate. Thomas kept quiet, instinctively sensing this was a crucial moment. After a few moments of silence, punctuated only by the gentle clinking of utensils, Emma continued. "She used to make it on Sundays," her voice gaining a bit more confidence, "and she'd let us help roll the meatballs. She would sing while she cooked," Sarah added softly, speaking for the first time. "She was always singing." Thomas listened closely, his own plate forgotten as the girls, between bites of pasta and sips of juice, began sharing fragments of their memories. "Our house was really small," Sarah continued, her eyes distant as though seeing something beyond the restaurant walls. "But it was nice. Mommy used to plant flowers in the window, roses and daisies. And sunflowers," Emma said. "They were her favorites." The girls told him about Marie, their mother, a talented seamstress who worked at home so she could take care of them. They described how she turned scraps of fabric into beautiful dresses, how she always found time to read them bedtime stories, how she kept the house cheerful despite having so little. "She got sick really fast," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "At first she only coughed a little, then—" Robert was already drinking before Sarah continued when her sister couldn't finish. "But after Mommy, after she—" Her voice faltered. He sold everything, Emma added, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Mommy's sewing machine, all the fabrics, everything. Thomas listened to every word, his heart breaking while his mind took in every detail. He noticed how the girls referred to their mother in the present tense when talking about happy memories, but couldn't quite manage it when discussing her death, a wound still too fresh to fully process. "You're both very brave," he said softly when they paused, "and I'm sure your mother is very proud of you." The twins looked at him with large, tear-filled eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. The restaurant buzzed on around them, but at their small corner table, time seemed to stand still. "You know," Thomas went on gently, "my mom sewed when I was little, too. Not beautiful dresses like your mum, but she did small repairs to help with expenses. She always said each stitch was sewn with love." The girls looked at him with renewed interest, as if this small connection to his own story had formed a bridge of understanding. "Would you like to meet her?" Thomas asked. "My mum. She makes a special hot chocolate that's just magical." For the first time that night, a genuine smile, though small, appeared on both girls' faces. They exchanged one of their silent twin glances, then looked back at Thomas and nodded. As they finished their dinner, Thomas watched the twins with a mixture of emotions. In a few hours, these two small girls had gone from mysterious figures on a sidewalk to real children with a story of love and loss that broke his heart. But he also saw in them a surprising strength, a survival instinct that reminded him of his own mother. Watching them finish their plates of pasta, now occasionally whispering to each other, Thomas made a silent promise not just to them, but to Marie's memory. These girls would have a chance at a better life, a chance to be children again, a chance to grow like the sunflowers their mother had so adored. The waiter brought dessert, 2 chocolate sundaes the girls shared, their faces lighting up with each spoonful. For Thomas, that simple moment symbolized the start of something new, the first step in a long journey of healing and fresh beginnings. Morning light had barely begun to seep through the office windows when Thomas arrived. He had left the twins sleeping at his house, under Alice's watchful care. She hadn't hesitated for a moment to welcome the girls when he showed up on her doorstep the night before. Sitting at his spacious desk overlooking the city, Thomas opened his laptop. The screen reflected his tired face. He hadn't slept much, his mind constantly replaying the previous day's events and all the implications of what he was about to do. His first search was about children's rights. Articles, laws, regulations, and legal procedures filled his screen. Each new piece of information raised more questions, more complexities. Thomas began making meticulous notes in his black hardcover notebook, the same he used for his most important projects. His assistant, Maria, walked in with coffee, pausing in surprise to see him there so early. "I need you to cancel my morning meetings," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "And please, schedule an appointment with Dr. Anderson, our corporate attorney, as soon as possible." Maria nodded, noting the child welfare documents on the screen. She had worked with Thomas long enough to recognize when something important was happening, and she was discreet enough not to ask unnecessary questions. By 9 o'clock, his phone rang. It was Alice. "The girls just finished breakfast," she said, her voice calm but emotional. "Emma helped make pancakes. Sarah is still very quiet, but her eyes lit up when I showed her my garden." Thomas smiled, recalling what the twins had said about their mother's sunflowers. "How did they sleep, Mom?" "Together, of course. Even though we have 2 bedrooms ready for them, they wouldn't separate. They slept holding hands." Alice paused. "Son, they had nightmares during the night. They cried, calling for their mother." Thomas closed his eyes, his heart aching. "I figured that might happen." "Thomas," Alice continued, her voice more serious now, "what are you planning to do?" It was the question he had been asking himself since the night before. His morning research made it clear that the situation was complex. Without a legal connection to the girls, his options were limited. "I'm not sure yet, Mom, but I can't just ignore this. I wouldn't expect you to," Alice interrupted kindly. "You've always had a heart bigger than the world, even back when it was just us who needed help." She paused. "You know, over the years, I've helped several families I met while cleaning. Some situations looked impossible at first, but there's always a way if you act with love and determination. Thomas smiled, remembering how many times his mother had come home with stories of families she'd helped, with food, clothes, or simply a sympathetic ear. What do you suggest, Mom? First, we need to understand their legal situation. Was that man, Robert, legally married to their mother? Does he have any documents for the girls? We have to know what we're up against. Thomas jotted down quick notes. His mother, even without formal legal training, had an intuitive grasp of practical matters from years of assisting people in tough spots. Then, she continued, we need to think about their immediate well-being. Trauma doesn't wait for bureaucracy, son. They need to feel safe, loved, protected. Everything else can be sorted out over time. How are they right now? Drawing in the garden. I gave them some paper and colored pencils. And Emma is showing a natural talent. She's drawing flowers with remarkable detail for her age. Sarah is more interested in the butterflies that show up in the garden. She even smiled when one landed near her. Thomas felt tears well up in his eyes. It was hard to believe these were the same scared girls he'd found on the sidewalk just a day earlier. Mom, he said after a moment of silence, what if I tried to get custody of them? The silence on the other end lasted only a few seconds but felt like an eternity. Are you sure, son? That's a huge responsibility. I'm not sure of anything, Mom. I just know I can't leave them behind. Alice sighed, but Thomas could hear the smile in her voice. Then let's do this right. I'll call Clara. Clara was a social worker Alice had met years ago while cleaning at the Department of Social Services. They had stayed in touch, and Clara had helped with several situations Alice had encountered over the years. She still works there. Yes, and she's in a higher position now. She can guide us on the first steps. Thomas took more notes. His notebook now had pages full of information, contacts, ideas. Next to the phone numbers and legal citations were small sketches, designs of a child's bedroom, ideas for a play space. Son, Alice brought his attention back again. There's something else we need to consider. What's that? The girls. They need to be heard in this decision. They're small, yes, but they've already experienced too much not to have a voice in their own future. Thomas nodded, even though he knew she couldn't see him. You're right. Absolutely right. Come have lunch with us today. Bring the information you've gathered, and Thomas... Yes, I'm proud of you, so proud. After hanging up, Thomas returned his attention to the computer screen with renewed energy. He opened his architectural design program and began working on a new project, renovating his apartment to accommodate 2 young residents. The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Anderson, his attorney, arrived around 11 a.m. with a folder full of documents on custody rights and legal procedures. Maria came in and out of the office, bringing more coffee and helping to organize the growing amount of information. Near noon, Thomas received a text message from his mother with a photo attached, Emma and Sarah in the garden, each holding a small pot with newly planted sunflower seeds that Alice had helped them sow. Their faces didn't show full smiles yet, but there was a softness in their expressions that hadn't been there the day before. That was when Thomas became absolutely certain of his decision. It wouldn't be easy. The documents scattered across his desk were proof of how complicated it would get. There would be legal obstacles, bureaucratic hurdles, emotional challenges. But looking at the photo of the girls with their sunflower seedlings, he knew it would be worth it. He put his papers in a folder, closed his laptop, and grabbed his keys. In the elevator on the way to the parking lot, he began a mental list. They would need new beds, school supplies, maybe even a bigger home with a yard where the girls could plant their own flowers. His phone buzzed with another text from Alice. Emma just asked if you're coming back for lunch. Say it's the first time she's asked a direct question. Thomas smiled as he got into his car. Yes, the road ahead would be long and complicated, but every small step forward, every timid smile, every whispered question would be a victory. And with his mother's support, guidance from professionals like Clara, and above all his own unwavering determination, he knew they would find a way. After all, as his mother always said, it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you want to go. And Thomas wanted to go to a place where two little girls could be children once more, could grow up surrounded by love and safety, could plant sunflowers and dream of bright futures. Driving toward his mother's house, Thomas thought of Marie, the girl's mother. Wherever she was, he hoped she could see that her daughters had found people willing to carry on her legacy of love. And as the midday sun bathed the city in golden light, Thomas silently promised her daughters would have the chance to flourish, just like the sunflowers she cherished so much. Morning was still veiled in mist when Thomas parked his car near the old amusement park. Dew coated the metal surfaces of its rusted structures, giving the place an almost ethereal atmosphere. On his back seat rested a brown leather folder containing neatly organized documents, the result of an entire night's work with Clara, the social worker. His plan was simple: enter, retrieve the girl's personal belongings, and leave. Emma had mentioned, through stifled tears, a special photo album their mother had made, hidden in a shoebox under some blankets. Thomas couldn't let those precious memories be lost. The sound of breaking glass slashed through the morning silence. Thomas hurried his steps, heart racing. When he reached the old booth that served as shelter, what he saw made his blood run cold. Robert, in a state of drunken rage, was systematically destroying the place. "Where are my girls?" he shouted, kicking a pile of blankets. "What did you do with them?" Shards of glass covered the floor, remnants of broken bottles mixed with pieces of what looked like a mirror. Robert had a cut on his hand that was bleeding, but he seemed oblivious, consumed by anger. Thomas stood in the entrance of the booth, his calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos inside. "They're safe, Robert. That's all that matters." Robert spun at the sound of his voice, swaying slightly. His bloodshot eyes locked onto Thomas with difficulty. "You," he roared, "you took them from me. You had no right." "Right," Thomas kept his voice controlled, but there was a hardness to it now. "What right did you have to force two children to beg, to make them live like this?" As he spoke, his eyes swept around the booth. Amid the wreckage, he could see signs of the girls' lives. Drawings taped to the walls, now partly torn, a rag doll lying in a corner, little clothes folded neatly on a crate, touches of order amid the chaos, most likely put there by the girls. Robert stumbled a few unsteady steps forward. "You know nothing. Nothing. You weren't here when Marie died, when everything fell apart." "No, I wasn't," Thomas agreed, standing his ground. "But I know Marie would never have wanted this for her daughters." Mentioning Marie seemed to strike something deep in Robert. He stopped, swaying. "You have no right to talk about her," he muttered, his voice cracking. "You never knew her." "No, I didn't." Thomas took a cautious step forward. "But I know Emma and Sarah. I know the fear in their eyes when they hear footsteps. I know how they flinch at every loud noise. And that's not the legacy a mother leaves for her children." Robert staggered over to a broken chair, collapsing into it. For a moment silence reigned, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the abandoned park. "I tried," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "At first, I really tried. But after she was gone, it was like seeing her twice every day. They have her eyes up, you know." Thomas nodded silently. He'd noticed in the pictures of Marie that the girls had shown him, the same large, expressive eyes. "So you started drinking more," Thomas said softly. "I already drank before," Robert admitted, running his injured hand across his face. "Marie, she tried to help me, wanted me to get treatment, but I never—" His voice trailed off. Thomas pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "It's not too late, Robert. What are you talking about? I have contacts at a rehabilitation center, a good place. They have a spot for you, starting today." Robert laughed bitterly. "And why would you do that?" "Why do you care?" "Because those girls deserve to know that the man their mother chose isn't a total lost cause, that he was strong enough to try changing, even if it's late." The words hung in the air between them. Robert looked at his trembling hands, the dried blood forming dark patterns on his skin. Did they ask about me?" he asked hesitantly. Thomas considered lying, but opted for the truth. "No, they're too scared right now." Robert closed his eyes, tears finally escaping. "I hurt them so much," he whispered. "Marie would never forgive me." Maybe not, Thomas agreed, but you can still do the right thing now. Doctor. Anderson's office was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of paperwork. Robert, now more sober but still trembling slightly, was signing document after document under the watchful eye of Clara, the social worker. Thomas stood by the window, mind still processing the morning's events. After the initial confrontation, Robert had surprisingly agreed to cooperate. Maybe it was sheer exhaustion, maybe a flicker of clarity beneath the haze of alcohol, but he had consented to both rehab and relinquishing custody of the girls. Clara explained each form with professional patience. This is the voluntary relinquishment of custody. This is the rehab consent form. And this is the no-contact agreement. Thomas let his thoughts drift as he looked at the abandoned park in the distance. In the clearer light of day, he could see beyond its current decay. His architect's eye began to see possibilities where others might only see rubble. Maria, his assistant, entered quietly, carrying more coffee. She stopped beside Thomas, following his gaze out the window. "You're already planning something, aren't you?" she asked softly. Thomas gave a slight smile. Over their years working together, Maria had learned to read his moments of inspiration. "Maybe," he replied. "I need you to look up a few things for me. The park's history, property records, and zoning regulations." "I already started," she answered, handing him a folder. "I figured you'd want this." Thomas skimmed the documents with growing interest. The park had been a major part of the community for decades before it went bankrupt. The property had been in legal limbo for years, meaning there was an opportunity here. The sound of a chair scraping across the floor pulled his attention back to the room. Robert had finished signing the paperwork and was now standing, looking both older and younger at the same time, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "There's a van waiting downstairs," Clara informed him quietly. "They'll take you straight to the rehab center." Robert nodded, then turned to Thomas. "That photo album you mentioned, the one with pictures of Marie and the girls." "I'll find it," Thomas promised. "I'll make sure they have it." "Thank you," Robert whispered. Then, almost inaudibly, "Take care of them." After Robert and Clara left, Thomas turned his full attention to the documents Maria had brought. He sat at his desk and began typing on his computer, his hands flying over the keyboard as he researched, took notes, and started drafting ideas. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas divided his time between managing the legal processes related to the twins and developing his new project, transforming the abandoned park. The Sunflower Community Center, as he named it in his preliminary plans, would be more than just another addition to his portfolio. It would be a complete metamorphosis, from abandonment to hope, from decay to renewal. In his office, the walls were now covered with blueprints and sketches. The old Ferris wheel would be restored as the centerpiece, a symbol of transformation. Around it, new spaces would take shape: educational areas, art studios, community gardens, safe and modern recreational zones. "Investors are interested," Maria reported in one of many meetings, "especially after hearing about the social component of the project." Thomas nodded, reviewing the financials on his screen once more. The project would be expensive, but feasible. His reputation in the market and his professional connections proved invaluable. At home, the changes were just as significant. With combined efforts from Thomas and Alice, the twins began to open up. Emma spent hours drawing in her new art corner. Thomas had set it up in one of the bedrooms. Sarah had fallen in love with the garden, spending time with Alice learning about different flowers. The legal process progressed, with Clara keeping everything on track. Authorities were surprisingly cooperative, especially after witnessing the girls' transformation in just a few weeks of proper care. "They're flourishing," Clara remarked during one of her regular visits. "It's remarkable to see the difference." Thomas knew she was right. The twins still had rough patches, occasional nightmares, sudden moments of fear, painful memories surfacing at unexpected times, but there was also laughter now, genuine smiles, moments of pure joy that came more and more frequently. One afternoon, while working on more details for the community center project, Thomas heard laughter coming from the garden. Through his home office window, he saw Emma and Sarah helping Alice plant another row of sunflowers. "They'll grow all the way to the sky," Emma exclaimed, her small hands carefully covering the seeds with soil. "Like the ones in the new park?" Sarah asked, referring to the project drawings Thomas had shown them. "Even taller," Alice promised, smiling at her granddaughters by affection. Thomas watched the scene with a heart full of gratitude. On his desk, the Sunflower Community Center plans depicted a vision for the future, a place where other children could find hope and opportunities. Next to it sat a recent photo of the twins, Emma proudly displaying one of her drawings, Sarah holding a sunflower seedling. And among his papers, carefully kept, was the photo album he'd recovered from the park. A treasure trove of memories the girls could now revisit without fear. The sound of more laughter drew his gaze back to the garden. The girls were now running on the grass, chasing a butterfly, their hair shimmering in the late afternoon sun. It was hard to believe they were the same frightened children he had found on that sidewalk, silently pointing at an abandoned park. "Thomas," Emma called Han, spotting him at the window. "Come see. Our sunflowers are sprouting already," he smiled, standing up from his desk. The plans could wait a while. Now it was time to see some sunflowers growing, both in the garden and in the form of the two little sunflowers fate had put on his path, proving that life can flourish even in the most unlikely places. Takameli that late afternoon sunlight bathed the construction site in golden tones as Thomas made his daily inspection of the progress. The old amusement park was steadily transforming. Rusted structures were giving way to new foundations, and the once derelict Ferris wheel now stood surrounded by scaffolding, awaiting its restoration. At the center of the grounds, a large display panel showed images of the finished project alongside historical photos of the park in its heyday. Thomas had made sure to include a special section titled Our Inspiration, featuring photos of Marie with the twins, capturing happy moments before everything fell apart. It was his way of honoring her memory in the project. "Excuse me," a soft female voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "Could you tell me who's in charge of this project?" Thomas turned to find a woman in her early 30s, wearing simple yet elegant clothes that suggested a long journey. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and something in her large, expressive eyes felt strangely familiar. "I'm in charge," he replied. "Thomas Carter. Can I help you?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the display panel, specifically on the photos of Marie. Tears began welling up as she slowly approached the images. "Marie," she whispered, gently touching one of the photos with her fingertips. Thomas felt his heart race, realization dawning. "You knew her?" The woman turned to him, tears now streaming down her face. "She was my sister. I'm Sophie. Sophie Lambert." The world seemed to pause for a moment. Thomas studied her face more closely now, the same expressive eyes that Marie had, which the twins had inherited. The same delicate shape of the face. "Please," Sophie went on, her voice shaky with emotion. "The girls, Emma and Sarah, they're fine," Thomas quickly reassured her, guiding her to a nearby bench. "They're safe." Sophie collapsed onto the bench, sobbing quietly. "I've looked for so long. I was in New Zealand when it happened. I was doing volunteer work in remote areas, barely any communication. By the time I found out about Marie," she opened her travel bag and pulled out a worn envelope stuffed with newspaper clippings and documents. "I tried every official channel, but Robert had changed addresses. No one knew where they were. I came back as soon as I could, but it took months to get all the permissions and visas sorted out." Thomas listened attentively as Sophie recounted her story, how she and Marie had grown up close after losing their parents at a young age. How Sophie had always been the adventurous one, traveling the world doing humanitarian work, while Marie had settled down, dreaming of opening her own sewing shop one day. "The last pictures she sent me were these," Sophie said, opening a small album. The girls had just turned 5. She was so proud of the dresses she'd made for them. Thomas looked at the photos. Emma and Sarah smiling in matching outfits, one pink and one blue. their faces aglow with happiness. They looked so different from the frightened children he'd found at the park. "They're at my mother's house now," he said gently, "not too far. If you want—" Sophie gazed at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "Will they even remember me? They were so small the last time I saw them." "There's only one way to find out," Thomas replied, taking out his phone. He called Alice, briefly explaining the situation. During the short drive to his mother's house, Thomas watched Sophie in the rearview mirror. She clung to the photo album as though it was her lifeline to the past. In her eyes, he could see the same unconditional love he'd seen in his own mother's. When they arrived, Alice was already on the porch, waiting. The twins were playing in the garden, surrounded by sunflowers in various stages of growth. Sophie froze at the gate, her hands trembling. "They planted sunflowers," she whispered. "Marie always—" "They were her favorites," Thomas finished softly. "They told us." In one of the garden beds, Emma was sketching the flowers in her new drawing pad, while Sarah carefully watered the younger seedlings. Sarah was the first to notice their arrival, turning with curiosity. Her little watering can fell onto the grass when her eyes locked on Sophie. "Emma," she called softly, tugging her sister's sleeve. Emma lifted her eyes from the drawing and froze. The two girls stood still, looking at the aunt they hadn't seen in so long, yet whose features were so similar to their mother's. Sophie took a hesitant step forward. "Hi, sweethearts," she said, voice trembling. "You probably don't remember me, but—" "Aunt Sophie." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Princess, it's me." It was as if something broke in the air. The twins ran in unison, throwing themselves into their aunt's arms as she dropped to her knees. For long moments, no one spoke. Only the quiet sound of sobs and murmurs of "I missed you so much" filled the garden. Thomas and Alice stepped back to give them privacy, watching from the porch as Sophie opened her photo album with the girls on either side, absorbed in every picture, every story. "Look at you two here," Sophie's gentle voice carried over to them. "Your first birthday. Marie stayed up all night sewing these dresses." "Mummy always made our dresses the same," Emma said, her little hand tracing the photo. "But in different colors," Sarah added, "so people could tell us apart. Just like she did for us when we were little," Sophie smiled through her tears. "She always said twins are like flowers in the same garden, alike but unique." The stories continued flowing as the sun went down. Sophie recounted her and Marie's childhood, how her sister had always been the artist of the family, how happy she was to find out she was expecting twins. Thomas watched the girls soak in each word, each memory. It was like missing pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. On their faces, he saw a mix of joy at rediscovering part of their history and bittersweet pain at the memories of their mother. "And this project?" Sophie eventually asked, glancing at Thomas. "How did it come about?" Thomas joined them on the grass as sitting down. He recounted the entire story, the meeting on the sidewalk, rescuing the park, his vision for the space. "Marie would have loved it," Sophie said softly. "She always said abandoned places are just places waiting to be loved again." Emma looked up from the photo album. "Aunt Sophie, are you staying?" The question hung in the air, full of hope and fear. Sophie looked at Thomas, then at the girls. "If you'll let me," she answered carefully, "I'd love to be part of your lives again." Thomas felt his heart clench at the sight of the twins' faces, a mixture of joy and uncertainty. They glanced at him as though asking for permission. "Family is important," he said softly, "and the more love, the better." The sun had fully set now, and Alice switched on the garden lights. The sunflowers swayed gently in the evening breeze, their silhouettes casting dancing shadows on the lawn. At the center of the garden, 3 figures remained huddled together, bound by blood and love, as memories of the past paved a road to the future. Thomas watched with a swirl of emotions. The universe worked in mysterious ways. On the same day that the foundations for the new community center began to take shape, another type of foundation was being rebuilt, that of the girls' family. The garden's sunflowers seemed to bow toward the group, as though paying tribute to this moment of reunion. Somewhere, Thomas liked to imagine, Marie was smiling, Her daughters had found not just safety, but a renewed piece of their own story through her sister's eyes and memories. The first week after Sophie's arrival felt like a dream. The girls bloomed in her presence, soaking up every story, every memory she shared about their mother. Sophie brought more than just photo albums. She brought life to the memories that had begun to fade. Thomas watched with both joy and apprehension. During breakfast, Sophie would tell stories of Marie's childhood, making the girls giggle at her teenage antics. In the afternoon, she helped Emma with her drawings, showing techniques Marie had taught her. With Sarah, she shared knowledge of flowers she had learned on her travels, including different species of sunflowers around the world. It was on a quiet evening, after the girls had gone to bed, that the inevitable conversation finally took place. Thomas was in his home office, finalizing details for the community center project, when Sophie knocked gently on the door. "Can we talk?" she asked, and her voice soft but resolute. Thomas nodded, indicating the chair opposite him. He noticed she was carrying a folder of documents, his heart already anticipating what she wanted to say. "You did something amazing for them," Sophie began, sitting down. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for saving my nieces from that situation." Thomas noticed the "my nieces" in her phrasing. "They're extraordinary children," he responded carefully. Sophie opened her folder, taking out some papers. "Thomas, I need to be direct with you. I came here to take the girls with me." Even though he had expected this, the words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He kept his expression controlled. Years of negotiations had taught him to mask his emotions. "They're my family, my blood," Sophie continued, her voice quavering slightly. Marie was more than my sister. After we lost our parents, she was my rock, my anchor. She sacrificed so much so that I could study, travel, pursue my dreams." She paused, holding up an old photo from her folder. Two teenage girls smiling, the older one with a protective arm around the younger one. "When I found out she was sick," Sophie swallowed hard, "I should have come back right away. I should have been here, but communication was so difficult where I was. By the time I got the news—" "You can't blame yourself for that," Thomas said softly. "I can," Sophie replied, tears now streaming. "And that's why I have to do the right thing now. Marie always said family is everything. She'd want the girls with someone who shares their blood." Thomas stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the moon lit the garden where earlier that day the girls had been laughing and playing. "Sophie," he began carefully, "I understand how you feel. More than that, I respect your blood connection to them." But he turned to face her. "Have you asked them what they want?" Sophie seemed caught off guard by the question. "They're too young to—" "They've been through things no child ever should," Thomas gently interrupted. "They lost their mother, were mistreated by their stepfather, lived in terrible conditions, and now, finally, they're starting to feel safe again. Which is exactly why they need family." "They already have a family," Thomas countered, his voice firm yet kind. "Not by blood, but by heart. My mother has become the grandmother they never had. This has become their home. They have routine, stability, security." Sophie also stood, meeting Thomas's gaze head-on. "You think I can't give them that? That's not what I'm saying. I know you love them. I know you'd do anything for them, but—" He hesitated. "Where do you live right now?" Sophie looked away. "I don't have a fixed place yet, but I can find one. And your job? Your humanitarian travels? I can change my life for them, like Marie changed hers for you," Thomas asked quietly. The question struck Sophie like an arrow. She swayed slightly, sinking back into her chair. "That's not fair," she whispered. "No, it's not," Thomas agreed, sitting next to her. "Nothing about this situation is fair. It's not fair that Marie died so young. It's not fair you didn't get to say goodbye. It's not fair the girls went through such hardship." Silence filled the office for a long moment. From upstairs, the soft sound of the Starry mobile Thomas had installed in the twins' room drifted through, the tune they now needed to sleep. "You know what Emma told me yesterday?" Thomas finally broke the silence. "She said she finally understands why her mom always planted sunflowers. It's because even when it's cloudy, they look for the light," were her exact words. Sophie sobbed softly. That's so Marie. She always found beauty in the little things. The girls are like those sunflowers now, Thomas continued. After all that darkness, they're finally turning to the light. They're putting down roots here, Sophie, and you can be part of that. How? She asked, voice small. Not as their sole legal guardian, but as their aunt, as a living link to their mother and their history. They need you, Sophie. But they need you for who you are. Their adventurous aunt who brings stories of the world, who shares memories of Marie, who loves them unconditionally. Sophie looked at the papers in her folder, custody documents she had prepared. With trembling hands, she began putting them away. You really love them, don't you? She asked softly. More than I ever thought possible to love anyone in such a short time, Thomas admitted. At that moment, a small noise at the door drew their attention. Emma and Sarah stood there in matching pajamas, looking at them with sleepy eyes. We had a nightmare, Emma explained quietly. Thomas and Sophie exchanged a glance. Wordlessly, they both opened their arms when the girls ran to them, Emma to Thomas, Sarah to Sophie. Want to hear a story your mum used to tell me when I had nightmares? Sophie asked gently. The twins nodded, settling onto the sofa in the office. Thomas got up to give them space, but 4 small hands pulled him back. Stay with us, Sarah requested. And so, under the soft glow of a desk lamp, Sophie began to tell a story from her and Marie's childhood, her gentle voice lulling the girls back toward sleep. Thomas watched the scene with a full heart. This wasn't a traditional family anyone might expect, but it was a family all the same. When the girls finally dozed off, Sophie looked at Thomas with different eyes, not as a competitor for the custody of her nieces, but as an ally in loving them. Marie always said family is more than just blood, Sophie whispered. I think I finally understand what she meant. Thomas gave a soft smile. There's enough room in their hearts for all of us. Outside, the sunflowers in the garden swayed gently in the moonlight, their faces still turned toward where the sun had set, patiently waiting for a new dawn. Like the flowers their mother loved so much, Emma and Sarah had found their way to the light, not through a single source, but through a mosaic of love formed by everyone who cared for them. And that night, in the quiet office with 2 small girls asleep between them, Thomas and Sophie silently made a pact. They would not compete for the girls' love, but work together to ensure they never again experienced the darkness of abandonment. The weeks that followed that late-night talk brought a quiet tension to the house, like an undercurrent, unseen on the surface but felt by everyone living there. The twins, especially sensitive after everything they'd been through, were the first to show signs of restlessness. Emma began having trouble sleeping again. Her drawings, which had started becoming vibrantly colored in recent weeks, reverted to darker tones. Sarah spent hours in the garden, but now in complete silence, just watching the sunflowers as if they might have the answers. Thomas noticed every change, every sign of anxiety. One particularly rough morning, he found Emma sitting alone on the staircase, clutching her sketchbook. "Are you okay, little one?" he asked, sitting beside her. Emma didn't answer right away, her fingers tracing the outline of a drawing, a family of sunflowers, some large and some small, all together. "Do we have to choose?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Choose what, Emma?" "Between you and Aunt Sophie." Thomas felt his heart sink. Of course they'd picked up on it. How could they not? They were young but had lived enough to sense when something wasn't right. "No one's going to make you choose," he replied gently. "You don't need to worry about that." But the worry was there, evident in how the girls now hesitated before showing affection, as if afraid of hurting someone's feelings. Thomas caught them whispering to each other, and then abruptly stopping when an adult approached. Sophie also noticed. She remained present, bringing stories and memories of Marie. But Thomas could see the hurt in her eyes when the girls withdrew, unsure how to act. One afternoon, while Sophie and Sarah were planting more sunflower seeds, Thomas found himself thinking about his own mother. She'd always said that sometimes true love meant giving up what we want for the good of those we love. Alice, with her trademark wisdom, was the first to put into words what everyone felt. "They're slipping away again," she said one night, after the girls were in bed. "Not the same way as before. But they are. The fear of losing, of having to choose, it's eating them up. Thomas knew she was right. The twins had started sleeping even more closely than before, as if afraid someone might tear them apart in the night. During the day, they rarely left each other's side, even in the simplest tasks. The situation reached a critical point on a Thursday night. Thomas had taken the girls to see the progress at the community center. Sophie met them there, bringing photo albums recovered from old family friends. While exploring the site, Emma suddenly stopped in front of the large panel displaying photos of Marie. "Do you think Mummy would like it here?" she asked, her voice small but laden with meaning. Sophie knelt beside her. "She would love it, sweetie. She always believed in turning sad places into happy ones. Like she did for us," Sarah added softly. "When we felt sad, she always sang that sunflower song," Sophie finished, tears in her eyes. Thomas looked on, his heart torn between the deep love he felt for the girls and the growing realization of what needed to happen. Sophie wasn't just a link to Marie. She was a living part of the girls' history, a piece of their mother that still breathed, laughed, and told stories. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Thomas quietly climbed the stairs to the twins' room. They slept entwined as usual, the starry mobile spinning softly overhead, casting little points of light on the walls. He stood there for a long time, watching their peaceful faces in slumber. Emma was still clutching her sketchbook. She'd drawn a portrait of the family today, with everyone together. Herself, Sarah, Thomas, Sophie, Alice, and at the center, a large sunflower that Thomas suspected represented Marie. That was when the decision crystallized in his heart. It wouldn't be easy. Perhaps it would be one of the hardest things he had ever done. But sometimes, love demands exactly that. Doing what's right, not what's easy. Silently, he left their room and went to his office. He turned on his computer and began drafting a new document. The words came slowly, each one weighing on his heart, but he knew this was the right path. "Shared custody agreement," he typed at the top of the page. He worked through the night, outlining a plan that would allow the girls to have both him and Sophie in their lives, structured and stable. Sophie would take primary custody. The blood tie and the memories of Marie were too precious to ignore. But he would remain their legal guardian as well, ensuring that the girls never had to choose, never had to feel like they were losing someone again. Dawn was breaking by the time he finished. Out the office window, he could see the garden sunflowers starting to turn toward the light of a new day. As always, they knew just where to look, even after the darkest night. Thomas picked up his phone and typed a message to Sophie. "Can we talk? I have a proposal that might work for all of us." The answer came almost immediately. "I couldn't sleep either. I'll be there in 15 minutes. While waiting, Thomas went upstairs again to the twins' room. They were still sound asleep, their small faces soft in the morning light. Emma's sketchbook had slipped onto the floor, and he picked it up gently. The family drawing was now more visible, everyone holding hands, smiling faces, the large sunflower in the center shining like a sun. This is how it should be, Thomas thought. Not a competition for love, but a collaboration. Not a choice between two options, but the joining of everyone who loved these girls. "You both deserve all the love in the world," he whispered to the sleeping twins. "And that's exactly what you're going to have." Outside, the first rays of sun began to gild the garden's sunflowers. A new day was dawning, and with it, the promise of a fresh start, not just for Emma and Sarah, but for all of them. Thomas gently closed the bedroom door and went down to wait for Sophie. In his heart, he knew he'd done the right thing. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't holding on tight, but opening your hands enough to let more love in. The doorbell's chime signaled Sophie's arrival. It was time to transform a potential battle into an alliance. Time to show the girls that love, like the sunflowers their mother had cherished, can grow in every direction, as long as there's enough light to help it blossom. The morning of the Sunflower Community Center's grand opening dawned flawlessly, as though the very sky wanted to celebrate the occasion. The sun shone gently through a few scattered clouds, and a soft breeze made the sunflowers in the front garden sway in a natural dance. Thomas stood in his temporary office inside the center, straightening his tie while watching the final preparations through the window. The transformation of the place was stunning. Where once there were abandoned structures and painful memories, there now rose a vibrant space of hope and possibility. The old Ferris wheel, fully restored, gleamed under the morning sun, its cabins painted in cheerful shades of yellow and orange. All around it, new buildings blended with preserved elements of the former park, creating a unique fusion of past and present. A gentle knock on the door pulled him back to reality. It was Alice, already dressed for the ceremony, her eyes shining with motherly pride. "The girls are almost ready," she said, entering. "Sophie's helping with the last touches on their dresses." Thomas smiled, recalling how the twins had insisted on wearing specially made dresses for the day, one in soft pink, one in pale blue, each with small sunflowers embroidered along the hem. Sophie had found one of Marie's old sewing machines in storage and, after restoring it, had used it to create the dresses exactly as her sister would have done. "How are they doing?" he asked, his voice betraying some anxiety about the announcement he planned to make later. "Excited, nervous, a bit of everything," Alice replied, adjusting his tie. "Just like you." Thomas nodded. The past few weeks had been intense, wrapping up both the community center details and finalizing the shared custody arrangements. Every decision, every signed paper had been taken with one goal in mind: ensuring the best possible future for Emma and Sarah. Outside, the first guests were arriving. The mayor, project investors, representatives of local organizations, families from the community, all eager to see the new space that promised to revitalize the neighborhood. Thomas headed downstairs to welcome them, pausing occasionally to admire parts of the project that were now complete. The children's library with bright shelves and cozy cushions, the art studio with huge windows for natural light, the community garden with raised beds for children to learn about growing plants. He was showing the sewing workshop area, a special tribute to Marie, when he heard familiar voices. Emma and Sarah were descending the main staircase, hands clasped, their new dresses swaying elegantly. Sophie followed, radiant in a seafoam green dress that highlighted her resemblance to her late sister. The girls halted upon seeing Thomas, identical smiles lighting up their faces. There were no shadows of fear in their eyes anymore, no traces of the anxiety of the past weeks. There was only love, pure, simple, multiplied. "Did you see the sunflowers?" Emma asked excitedly, running up to him. "They're even taller today." "Because it's a special day," Sarah added, joining her sister. "Mommy always said flowers grow more on happy days." Thomas knelt to their eye level, his heart overflowing. "You both look beautiful," he said softly. "Your mom would be so proud." "Aunt Sophie made our dresses with Mommy's sewing machine," Emma said, twirling around to show off the details, "and added sunflowers, just like she did," Sarah noted, gently touching the embroidered flowers. The opening ceremony started right at 10 a.m. The mayor gave a speech about urban renewal and social transformation. Representatives from partner organizations spoke about the programs that would operate in the new space. But the most significant moment was yet to come. Thomas stepped onto the small stage set up near the restored Ferris wheel, one twin on each side of him. Sophie and Alice standing just behind. He looked out at the gathered crowd, familiar and unfamiliar faces, all united by the promise of a fresh start. "This center," he began, voice clear and filled with emotion, "was born from an unexpected encounter on a sidewalk, one night that would change many lives." Two little girls pointed to this place, then abandoned, silently asking for help. He paused, feeling Emma's and Sarah's small hands tighten around his. "But this isn't just a rescue story. It's a story of how love can bloom in the most unlikely places, how a family can form in ways we never imagined, and how sometimes we have to lose everything to find something even more precious." Thomas then turned to Sophie, who took a step forward. "Today I want to announce that this center will be more than a community space. It will be a symbol of how different kinds of love can coexist and strengthen each other. Sophie, the girl's aunt and Marie's sister, will assume their primary custody." A murmur rose from the crowd, and Thomas saw a few surprised faces. But he continued, However, this isn't an end, it's a new beginning. Through a special shared custody arrangement, I will remain in the girls' lives as their guardian and protector. This center will be our meeting point, our common ground, Wankite, where different types of family can form and grow together. Sophie took the microphone next, tears gleaming in the morning sun. And that's why I'd like to make a special request, she said, turning to Thomas. I'd like to ask you to be the girls' official godfather, not just on paper, but in their hearts, the way you already are. The twins released Thomas's hands and ran to Sophie, then ran back to Thomas, forming a physical bridge between the two adults they loved so much. Family, Sophie continued, her voice trembling with emotion, isn't just about blood. My sister Marie knew that. She always said true love is like a sunflower. It finds the light even on the darkest days and grows toward it. Thomas looked at the emotional crowd, at Alice silently weeping, at the girls smiling with a pure joy that made every step of this journey worthwhile. This center will bear Marie's name, he concluded, not just as a tribute but as a promise that there will always be room for more love, more understanding, more possibilities, that there will always be hope, even in the most improbable places. The ceremony went on with a formal ribbon cutting, guided tours of the facilities, and plenty of photographs. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, when most guests had gone. Thomas and Sophie, Alice and the girls gathered in the sunflower garden. Emma had made a special drawing for the occasion of the whole family under a sky filled with sunflowers. Sarah had prepared small pots with sunflower seedlings for everyone to take home. You know what Mommy always said about sunflowers? Emma asked as she helped hand out the pots. What, sweetie? Sophie asked softly. That they're like a family. Even if they grow in different places, they always turn toward the same light. Thomas looked around at his unconventional family in the garden. Alice with her boundless maternal love, Sophie with her precious stories and memories, the twins with their incredible capacity to love and forgive, and felt his heart overflow. The late afternoon sun drenched the garden in a golden glow, making the sunflowers shine like tiny suns. Somewhere, Thomas liked to think, Marie was smiling. Her daughters had not only found safety, but they had expanded the love she had planted in their hearts. That encounter on the sidewalk, on a night that now felt so long ago, hadn't just been about saving two little girls. It was about rediscovering the true meaning of family, about learning that love doesn't divide, it multiplies, and about realizing that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as challenges. And there, in that sunflower garden, surrounded by different types of love woven together in unexpected yet perfect ways, Thomas finally understood there isn't just one path to happiness, one shape of family, one way to love. Like the sunflowers Marie had cherished, love finds its own way toward the light, sometimes winding through difficult paths, sometimes blooming in improbable places, but always, inevitably, reaching toward the warmth and hope of a new dawn.